Good morning, Bananimators. Today I'm scrolling the IKEA website to find us some reference. So today we're going to be talking about contour lines. I've got a couple different images here. I haven't decided which one I'm going to go with, but I picked the IKEA website because they have a lot of just like simple forms. Like they have vases and bowls and cups and stuff like that. I recommend doing stuff from real life, like get your bowls out of the cupboard and set them up in a little still life and practice just putting them in different places, higher and lower, so you can see the difference in perspective and just things you can move around. Staplers are very good. If you're on the beginner end of the scale, you want to stick with very simple things. Even just starting with a box is wonderful, or a ball, and putting boxes and balls together in different ways so that you can practice sorting those things out. And then as you go farther along, you're going to make more complex studies. So moving into like handbags and boots and things that are a little bit softer, leather goods, that's kind of a nice intermediate. It has a little bit more of an organic situation happening, but stick to something that's like 10% too hard. If you're doing something that's 200% too hard, you're going to get really frustrated and burnt out and throw everything in the garbage. If you're working on something that's too easy, you're not really learning. So you have to be just the smidgenest little wee bit frustrated all the time. That's the best place for learning. I like to think of my current subject as my villain. So I'm always working to conquer that villain. And it takes a long time. It's not a villain you can go and like defeat in one final blow. It's like you build up allies and you find resources and you keep going back to the villain until you can finally overcome it. That helps me deal with the amount of time that this stuff takes to learn. Let's go with this one. I like this little thing here, and I'm going to crop it down. So there's a bunch of different ways you can go about studying contours. Actually, let's do the grid just for funsies. I'm not even going to do a super good grid, and I'm going to duplicate it and bring my grid over here. So even though my, like this is clearly bigger than this, because this matches this, I'm actually going to do okay on it. And I'm going to think about just looking at the very outlines of things. I'm not going to do any internal contours today, just the exterior contour. All right, so up in the corner, I'm going to put my little list of things that I'm keeping in mind when I'm doing contours. We have proportions. So the bottom of this little vase here is actually a little bit taller than the top, so we're going to try and maintain that size. With the grid, it does make it a little bit easier. Working with the grid gives you a little cheat. We can look at the length of this versus the width of this. So add another little, let's measure. Oop, we got this guy here. So this has a little bit more, like a extra quarter or so on here. So those types of things, if you're not using a grid, that's one of the ways that you could find how to measure these things, by comparing the width of this to the height of this. So we can take our little measuring stick. This length is a little bit longer than this length. So a lot of times, especially if people are doing portraits and stuff, they get like wonky proportions and they're like, how do I fix this? And the answer is measure more. That's the whole thing. So I have my grid. That's going to make this much easier. And I'm going to aim for the exterior of all this stuff without mucking about too much with the interior. Here, we're going to see there's a little wee gap here, not super big. I'm going to come down here. We've got, that's about 1/5 of the way up there. We're not quite touching this. So I'm just giving myself landmarks of where these things are. And that will help me when I'm drawing out my shape. So we have a little lip, comes out a little bit. Let's see, we're about 1/3 of the way down here. So if you struggle with visualizing, some people have better abilities to be able to like measure if this is a third or a quarter or a half. If you have to use a ruler or some sort of measuring, do it. There's no sense in lamenting over the things that you don't do well. Like I have a terrible memory, and I mean, I could have a fit every time I forget something, or I could just write everything down and make lists and keep track of things in a tracker, because I'm incapable of remembering things. So don't fight the things that you're bad at. Just figure out how you can work around them. If you need to use a ruler to measure things, do it. I mean, there's no problem. I don't know why people feel like using tools that exist are cheating. Like there's a lot of people who talk about how they can't draw a straight line without a ruler. And I'm like, just so use a ruler. I don't see this as a problem. I don't want to get too mucked up with this. I will because that's my nature. I love detail. So I'm going to pull myself away and come back down here to like the major shapes. Boop, boop, boop. So we can actually draw a line across here and see how much we actually come up. And I didn't come up high enough. So we have this dude here. Oop. And I'm going to kind of stand back and I'm going to look at this bigger square, because it's not just these little squares. There's also the bigger square around. So I'm going to take a look at the whole thing, and so I can get the whole shape. Because if you come in and you just do this little shape and then you do this little shape and this little shape, they might not line up depending on how you're doing. It can be fun to do that. One way of turning this into an interesting exercise would be to cover all but one square and only copy that one square. That would be cool to see what came out of that. Here I've got this little thing. There's a little lip here that comes up. So I'm going to make sure to include that. Boop, boop. And this exercise takes as long as it takes. Like, you can set yourself a little timer of like 20 minutes or so. That feels like an okay amount of time to work on one drawing. But if you have time to just like sit and see how long it takes you to get this whole thing done, then do that. Drawing is something that takes a long time, and the ability to sit in your own boredom and just be patient with yourself and take the time it takes to work out problems to these solutions is one of the most powerful skills you can cultivate. Back in the older days, like I grew up in the 90s when we had cartoons and stuff on sometimes, but we didn't have them 24 hours a day. I had an NES. So, we had like Mario Brothers 3, and that was like pretty sick for like, a couple months. And then it was like, well, I played that one game for months. I don't get another game for another few months. So I guess I'll go do something else. It really forced us to practice being bored. I also grew up in a rural community, and my family they still have wood heat. So I spent a lot of time, especially in the fall, out with my dad, and he would be just going with the chainsaw, cutting up a lot of firewood. And it was my job to pick up the firewood and put it into the wheelbarrow and bring it over to the drying stack. So I put in a lot of hours just stacking firewood. And that ability to just do monotonous work has really paid off well. Now I'm erasing as I go. That's okay. You can decide if you want to erase or not. For this, I feel like it's fine. I'm trying to avoid using cross contour. Like, one of the things I would usually do if I was trying to figure this out is I would give myself cross contours like this and kind of build it up as a little wireframe. Try not to do that. Trying to just look at the shapes in here. So let's talk about negative shape. So while I'm doing these things, I'm looking not only at the like little arch, but I'm also looking at this shape here. Does this shape and my shape look the same? And actually, if I was smart, I'd put this on another layer, and then I could bring it over and see how well it's lining up. So I've gone a little bit wimpy with my shape. Let me see. It has to be below this line. So the length of my dude is not long enough. And if I bring a line across here, I can see, yes, by checking that, it is inaccurate. Let's go back to blue. I can actually run a line over. Now, if I was working on a canvas, and when I went to animation school, this is the type of thing we do. We'd have a little still life like this, and we'd actually work with real still lives. You'd use your pen, you'd hold your arms straight out and like measure with your pen, and then you could bring it back and compare on things. But if you set up your easel in a way like this, where you've got your still life set up here, you can still run horizontal lines across if you've set your thing up in a similar place like this, where you're using similar proportion as the actual image you're doing. That down. Actually, let's run a line. So it's a little bit lower than this one. So I might have gone to, no, that one seems pretty good. So I got to come down here with that. And then let's see where the top is. All right, so I've gone too high. So we're going to check as we go and fix our little mistakes. No problemo. And then because we can like look at this, we've got a little step, boop, 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 like a little W. So I'm going to come back out, put in my little W, doot, doot, doot. So let's look at this. This is higher because it's back. Boop. I'm going to bring it down a little bit. This feels a little bit closer. Let's run that horizontal over. And we can see the edge of the table here. Let's see, it goes through boop, boop, boop. And then the table is going to be about here. And again, you can use a ruler or like a T-square if you're doing this in an analog. And it comes close. It's touching here, like this corner is a big landmark that we could use. It's down below here. So I'm going to turn my canvas. Now, you can't do that on an easel, but if you're using, I often draw just with paper on a clipboard. You can turn your clipboard if you need to. Because if you're drawing an arc and using your wrist as a pivot point that's locked in place is going to give you the ability to make really similar arcs like this, just using the natural curve of the way your wrist moves. And now we have some background stuff. I'm just going to lightly put that in all the way over to here. It goes down below. Boop. That stuff's not super important to get as clear as the front stuff because it's blurry. I'm also going to use just softer lines back here. So these front lines, I can even thicken them up so that they're more visible. And these back lines, I'm going to leave a little bit more soft and loose. And the more I have drawn, the more reference I have. Like here, I've got this as well as this. So I can say, okay, we've got boop. We're looking at that negative shape again. We're looking at this shape. It's going to look like that. So we go, and then we've got a little boop. And then we can, if we wanted to, we could play with these shapes up here, let it feel a little bit organic. You can decide how meticulous you want to be about having it look exactly like the thing that we're working on. I've never thought that making foliage perfect is a good use of time unless you're matching something that has to be rotated. Like you have to animate the rotation of something, then you have to be very meticulous about the foliage, but I don't think that's necessary here. So that's our still life. It's not the most beautiful. The line quality is not crazy good. And it's just about 20 minutes in. I can already see that this is bigger. Mine is bigger than this one is. But if you wanted to, you could actually just go back when you're finished and do a little trace and then see how accurate you were at picking up the different forms. As you practice this stuff, like your first ones, it might actually take quite a long time to get this stuff done. And I think the most important thing is that you don't rush. Spend the time just really analyzing where the shapes and forms are, measuring things, comparing the different shapes to one another. Look for those negative spaces while you're in here. And then once you're done, you can have a little overlay, see how well you did. So you can see I'm off a bunch on these curves. Curves are harder. This one's not too bad. The table's in pretty close to, that's not too bad. I don't feel too bad about that at all. So what I could do now, if I wanted to continue this, I could, take advantage of my little guide and tidy this up. I don't think there's any shame in correcting your work this way. I can't see why the next time you'll get a little bit better just because you're practicing, but we want to move on and do something else. We're going to just tidy that up a little bit. It's still a bit messy. If I wanted to, I could use a little bit of tone just to separate the different pieces. And the next thing I could do is go in and do the next stage. So the next stage could be a clean line art drawing where I try and get some of the line quality of the different things. Like glass is geometric, so you're going to use like sharper, harder lines. You're going to try and get this curve very, very clean. Like an organic curve might curve up, it might curve down, but this is very like circular. So your like maximum point is here as opposed to this one, which is pulling up. Or here we're pulling down. Very uniform. And these arcs as well, very hard-edged, geometric. So going back in and making these very crisp and clean, and then playing a little bit with like having a little more organic wispy line, getting some texture and stuff in there. We could use this to practice all the different things we talked about in our Just Line Art video. So that's it for this one. I could go on for a million years. So if you're treating this video series as a sort of guide of how you would study, do a couple of these still lifes You can, grab something from IKEA, or you could do like Pinterest, or, set up something in your house and take a photo of it. That way, if it gets moved, you have a reference to go back to. And just do a rough of where, like finding where everything belongs in the scene, and give yourself something like this that you could use then to do other contour exercises on top of for the next few videos. That's it for now. Thanks for dropping by. Like, share, subscribe, all those things internet people ask you to do. And I'll see you in the next video. Like, you use, like, you have a little ring. Can you see the rings? Why? Oh, there it goes. I kind of think of whatever my challenge is as my, like, current villain. Manolin. My doggy. I like to think of my current area of study as my Manolin. You go, boy.